This is Kelly from Watch the Obsession. Thanks for taking time to watch this video. It took Bryan Kohberger over 1 year to provide an alibi the way it's supposed to be provided, naming a specific location you were at and also the witnesses who can support the alibi. Well, in this case, who's supporting his alibi other than cell phone records, which we all thought were going to do nothing but work against him. And in the final analysis, I think that will still be the case, but there's been some back and forth, to say the least, between the prosecution and the defense regarding the discovery that the prosecution is making available to the defense in regards to Bryan Kohberger's brand new alibi, and specifically the video footage of a car that is said to be Bryan Kohberger's car in certain places that would incriminate him of committing this crime. The conversation that Nancy and Chris from the interview room have about that issue here in this video is spot on. It's a really good discussion. Can't wait for you to hear it. But that is yet to be seen. Also, a friend of a cop who worked on this case confirms that Bryan Kohberger was seen wearing gloves, plastic gloves, medical gloves, after the commission of this horrible crime. Let's see what Nancy Grace and her panelists have to say about these issues. Oh, hey, but wait, first, do you remember this video post that went around social media quite a while back from somebody who claimed to be a friend of somebody in law enforcement? And this was well before any details of this crime came out, well before the probable cause affidavit came out. And some people think that the person who spoke on this video, whose reflection you can barely see, is in fact Bryan Kohberger himself. One of those people may have been me along the way, and I'm still not sure. Just take a little listen here, and I'll play the whole video at the end of this for you.
Into the room after doing what they did on the second floor. They went upstairs. The person cleanly and quietly unalived the first victim. The second victim awoke and tried to run. They believe that the man possibly grabbed her, and she screamed loudly.
Breaking news tonight. Did Idaho Slay suspect Bryan Kohberger actually wear plastic surgical gloves in the grocery store for weeks after the quadruple murders to avoid leaving a trail of evidence? And did Kohberger's cell phone pings track along with the victims for weeks before the murders? This as the victim's former roommate breaks her silence to reveal a final text to slay victim Maddie Mogan in an eerie premonition. Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. Thank you for being with us.
I texted our group of friends, and I just had said, has anyone heard from Maddie? And I remember my last text message to her was are you okay? And I feel like right then and there I kind of just knew that something was wrong.
That emotional sound of the former roommate from our friends at KXLY. You were hearing Ashlyn Couch as she desperately tried to reach Maddie Mogan, having no idea what had happened. Again, thank you for being with us. A lot happening in the Bryan Kohberger case. Joining me an all-star panel to make sense of what we know right now. But first, listen to this.
Ashlyn Couch transferred her lease at 1122 King Road to Xander Kernodle just 6 months before Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez were slain in the home. Couch remembers getting an alert from the university and immediately reaching out to friends still in Moscow. Couch's last text to Mogan before learning of her death was, "Are you okay?" Couch followed up in a group chat with friends. "Has anyone heard from Maddie?" Couch says the thought that the murders could have happened earlier is unsettling, commenting that you never know how long someone is watching your house.
Wow. Again, you are hearing from KXLY. That was Ashlyn Couch speaking, trying, again, desperately to get in touch with, we now know, murder victim Maddie Mogan. With me, an all-star panel, straight out to Dave Mack, crimeonline.com investigative reporter. Dave, explain to me the time sequence as to what we are hearing from Ashlyn Couch, the former roommate there at King Road.
Well, Ashlyn was talking about how 6 months before this happened, she actually was moving, and so Xana Kernodle took over her part of the lease on the King Road home, got her room. But Ashlyn was still in contact with her friends from there. And so during that time period when the murders happened, an alert from the college went out and said, "We've had a homicide near campus." And immediately, Ashlyn Couch thought of her friends in the King Road house. That's why she was reaching out right away.
Guys, this young girl, Ashlyn Couch, now speaking, will she be a witness? What can she tell us? Anything about the King Road address at all? And, to Chris McDonough, director of the Cold Case Foundation, former homicide detective with over 300 homicides under his belt and host of the popular YouTube channel, The Interview Room. Chris McDonough, the issue here as far as Ashlyn Couch goes, the fact that she had a premonition, that's probably not going to be admissible at trial. The fact that she tried desperately to reach anybody at the King Road address, specifically trying to find out what was happening with Maddie Mogan, when Maddie would not respond, that may not come into evidence. However, her knowledge of the home. And I found it very curious what she said when she said, you never know how long somebody has been watching your house.
Yeah, Nancy, that statement in of itself is fascinating. I mean, the fact that she has a premonition as well, post the homicides here, that, she's thinking, when I was there, could somebody have been watching me? And or obviously her roommates there. So that in itself, I think the authorities, need to dig into that if they haven't already. That's pretty telling.
Hand in hand with what you were talking about is potential evidence, and we saw it in the Alex Murdaugh trial, where Murdaugh's phone was traveling along with his wife, Maggie Murdaugh, before her phone was thrown unceremoniously out of his vehicle the night of the murders. Now, reports that we're going to hear evidence that his phone, Bryan Kohberger, was spotted in cell phone pings in and around where the victims were in the weeks leading up to the murders. To Mark Tate joining me, high-profile lawyer out of Savannah, partner with the Tate Law Group. Mark, thank you for being with us. What do you make about that potential evidence that where they went on several occasions, his cell phone would ping as well?
Sure, I think that's
just
something.
A coincidence, Mark Tate?
Well, it may be. Remember, he went to school just 8 miles away. And if I was defending this case, I would say, if you're going to use cell phone pings to prosecute him, then you have to look into the fact that he has put forth an acceptably under Idaho law that he has an alibi, which is he has to state a specific place where he was and the witnesses who will put him there. The witnesses here are the cell phone pings. So the problem that we have here is that the prosecution's going to use cell phone pings to put him stalking these victims. Then they're going to have to deal with the fact that he says those same pings put him in the woods stargazing or whatever thing it is he's going to claim he's doing. And so I think that the cell phone pings may be helpful and interestingly so, to both sides, because remember, the defendants here, the defense counsel, has a job to maintain that this man is innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And they are fighting very hard. They have not made this easy for the prosecution. Yes.
Mark Tate, when you're between a rock and a hard spot, do you just immediately regurgitate innocent till proven guilty? We all know that.
Absolutely.
Everybody watching this program right now is illegal eagle. If his cell phone is moving along where they go. If they go to this food truck, there's his cell phone. If they go to that restaurant, oop, there he is again. I mean, isn't it true, Dave Mack, that at one bar he was actually asked to leave because he was making female patrons feel totally skeeved out by asking them questions such as, hey, what's your home address?
Oh yeah, he freaked out. He actually scared people or women in this bar to a point where they actually made a note on the tickets when he had been there previously. It wasn't just one time, Nancy. He had been to this bar several times, and each time it got progressively worse to where none of the women wanted to wait on him anymore.
So, to you, Karen Stark joining us, and boy, do we need a shrink. Karen Stark joining us, a renowned TV radio trauma expert, psychologist, consultant. It's KarenStark.com. Karen with a C. Karen, I'm going to circle back to the Pings potentially traveling along together. And Karen, I haven't even gotten to this dude wearing gloves to the grocery store. I don't mean gloves because it's cold outside. I mean surgeon gloves. Okay, to the grocery store, Karen Stark. This is not during COVID where people would, spray 409 on their canned goods before they touch them. This is now, the here and now. For weeks after the murders, this guy, Bryan Kohberger, was wearing surgical gloves everywhere he went. I'll go back to that. But what do you make? And I'd like to hear the former roommate, one more time. This is Ashlyn Couch on a very emotional statement, and this is from our friends at KXLY. Listen.
I texted our group of friends, and I just had said, has anyone heard from Maddie? And I remember my last text message to her was are you okay? And I feel like right then and there I kind of just knew that something was wrong.
Karen Stark, how many times have we heard that, where a victim's family member or friend would know instinctively that something was horribly wrong? And there's a whole issue of survivor's guilt, Karen Stark. If I had called her earlier, if I had asked her out that night, if we had been at what, you fill in the blank, if, and then fill in the blank. That's what a lot of the friends are going through.
Of course they are, Nancy, because we all know what that's like when you think, if I had only been able to. And what's interesting, we all have, I'm pretty sure, that experience of you have a feeling, you have an instinct that something is wrong. And I know it happens to me. It used to happen with my mother all the time. It happens with my brother, my husband. Sometimes you are so connected to people that you just have a feeling that something is going on with them. I think it's even happened between the two of us. I've had that with you. You've had it with me. When you know somebody really well, you are connected to them over distance and you can feel it. And that's what she's describing. We can all relate to that. Wearing the gloves, that's him protecting himself. This is a man in total control, has to be on top of everything. And now he's wearing gloves so that you can't get near his DNA. I'm not surprised about that.
Joe Scott Morgan joining me, professor of forensics, Jacksonville State University, author of Blood Beneath My Feet on Amazon, and star of a hit series Body Bags with Joe Scott Morgan. Joe Scott, thank you for being with us. I know in your line of business, having been to over 10,000 death scenes in your career, you have had many people say, I knew something was wrong. And it's one thing to embellish the facts as you look back retrospectively, but this young girl, Ashlyn Couch, was actually frantically trying to text all of her friends, trying to find out, where is Maddie? Because, Joe Scott, you and I review a lot of evidence, it was atypical of Maddie not to respond. And that struck concern as the hours ticked by.
It gives you pause. I think when you're conducting an investigation, if someone deviates from their normal day-to-day routines, and particularly when you're talking about responding to friends that are considered to be within your intimate circle, that's something that would give an individual pause. But Nancy, I have another kind of chilling little side note about this. And this young lady, she moved on from her lease. And do you know when she moved on from her lease and turned it over? It approximates almost the same exact time that Kohberger shows up in Washington. This goes back to, I think, probably June, May, perhaps. And that's another little chilling piece to this. Can you imagine now, retrospectively, that Ashlyn is sitting back and thinking about this, that, almost one of those there but for the grace of God go I moments. And again, it adds another layer of horror to this, Nancy.
One thing I've really hated throughout this, Joe Scott Morgan, is the way that some of the victims have been portrayed as like party girls, tramps, staying out too late, drinking. That's not true. Yes, they were out that night. They were heading into the Thanksgiving weekend. They were not out any later than any other student would be on a party night. None of these girls have arrest histories, nothing like that. They're all making good grades. They're beloved by their family. And you know what, Joe Scott Morgan? As I always say, birds of a feather flock together. When I look at Ashlyn Couch and I hear her speak, that tells me not only who she is, but who her friends are. I mean, Joe Scott, I don't see you hanging out with the dope dealer down at the corner. Why? Because you have nothing in common. In college, in law school, people go, hey, did you go to that party Friday night? I'm like, no, I was studying. I got 2 jobs and I've got to get through law school and I got to pass the bar on the first try. That's not what I was doing. I had my eye on a different prize. When I look at Ashlyn Couch, the good girl, that tells me who these victims were. And I've had it about up to here with people trashing them or their parents or their mom or I think it's so wrong. And that is going to happen at this trial unless the judge wakes up and pays attention.
One of the things I find fascinating about her interaction, and particularly where she was domiciled in this location, and you were mentioning earlier, could she testify? This is what I think personally that she's going to testify to. Kind of the standard rattle and hum of what it was like living in that home. Remember, as you had mentioned, talking about partying and all this sort of thing, one of the things that came out early on in this case was this thought that this was party central, right? No one knows the codes to the door. It's always open. The sliders are open. People can come and go as they please. Well, Ashlyn, I think, kind of from a historic standpoint, she will be able to talk about that as she lived there. And this is not something that perhaps just occurred out of the blue. If this was a party location, it had been a party location for a while. And I think that that's going to be rather probative in this case.
Hey, and another thing about that, Joe Scott Morgan, I will never forget. I moved into off-campus housing with some other co-eds. This is an undergrad. And I had my parents come visit. I got it all ready and cleaned it, everything. Well, wouldn't you know, this was on a Saturday night. They were coming Sunday after church. I was waiting on them. Little did I know that the guys below me, I lived on the top floor, the SAEs, I had no idea who they were. I never knew them, had a huge kegger in the front yard. And somebody had spray painted curse words all on the interior of when my parents walked in. I'm not even going to say what they were, but they alluded to sex acts. And my parents walked in to see this in red spray paint. I had not even seen it. I was, mortified. So I think you're right. This girl, Ashlyn Couch, could testify to, you say, the hum and the flow of living there. But I was thinking about something else, Joe Scott. I was thinking about, that sliding glass door that Chris McDonough and I kept looking at, wondering if that was the point of entry. I wonder if she could testify if it locked, if it was easily accessible. Yes, that one. Thank you. And there's one on each level. Were there ever alarms in the home? So many things. Also, during these parties, could somebody sneak in and out that wasn't invited? You see where I'm headed? She is really a Pandora's box of information about the murder scene.
Yeah, she is. And, you talk about the functionality of those doors, access and opportunity. Of course, she's going to be the only one to be able to tell that tale now, isn't she, Nancy? Because we can't go back to the physical structure. So she's going to be able to talk about it. I hope
Well,
that
you've got the two roommates that survived. Remember?
Yeah, we do, but I think that perhaps in this particular case, when it gets down to it, can she actually? And again, this goes back to history. If the door was not functioning, the lock did not work. How far back in time does she go as like this place, her place of residence? How long had it been? For instance, if it was, how long had it not been functioning? I'd like to know the answer to that question. And the points of access. Could someone be heard coming in through that door? Again, acoustically, she's going to be able to testify to that.
A friend of an officer working the Bryan Kohberger murder investigation says Kohberger was very careful in the days before his arrest. The source says the cop followed Kohberger in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, and observed him wearing plastic gloves while picking up groceries at a local Giant store. The cop also said that Kohberger's cell phone pings matched the movements of the victims for weeks before the murders.
Oh, just wait till the jury hears this. Listen, you cannot, under the law, under the U.S. Constitution, as it has been interpreted through case law, cases that have occurred after the Constitution, of course, you cannot bring in a suspect, a defendant's bad reputation. You cannot bring in evidence of bad acts unless they can be verified and they are similar to the case in chief and were in a timely manner. But here, when the police surveillance, if this is confirmed, police surveillance are following Kohberger and they see him wearing plastic gloves into the grocery store, apparently wearing plastic surgical type gloves for weeks after the murders. Why? And you're going to hate this, Mark Tate, which makes me super happy. Mark Tate, renowned defense attorney. You know what I love to tell a jury? If you don't know a horse, look at his track record. Hold it. Number one, while these same cops were watching Kohberger, they knew they were going to arrest him. They were trying to get DNA evidence. They already had some DNA evidence. Now they needed the dad's DNA evidence, and there's the dad right there, driving along with Kohberger. The dad's just chatting away like nothing's wrong. The Kohberger's like, what the hell? Why are the cops pulling us over? Look at the dad. He's totally relaxed. Kohberger's like, what? Okay, stay with me. They're watching Kohberger, and they see Kohberger outside putting the family trash in the neighbor's trash cans, the dumpster, wearing gloves. Wait, Not done yet. Not done yet. There were other times he's seen wearing gloves. Why? Why is he wearing gloves all the time, Mark Tate? And how do you think that is going to affect a jury? Oh, I know what it was. It came to me. Wait a minute. I got to tell you one more. So when they arrest Kohberger, when they arrest him, when they go into his parents' home in the Poconos, they go in, it's like 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Kohberger is standing there in the kitchen. Why is he up and everybody else is asleep in the middle of the night?
I don't know, Nancy. Didn't you tell me you got up at 3:30
surgical gloves.
Well, no one's checking out what you're wearing at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you were
I
up
can tell you this much. I didn't have on surgical gloves.
All right. Well, so here's the deal.
I've got three instances, and that's just off the top of my head.
You've got 3 instances of him wearing gloves. And wait. In one instance, he was throwing trash away. Can you think of a better reason to wear gloves? Now, in the other instances, what I would say,
so the cops can't get my DNA after a quadruple murder. Well, that's a good reason.
Yeah, I understand. No, I got you. But maybe throwing trash away, it's okay to wear gloves. I don't know. That's not something I think I'd rest my hat on as a prosecutor. However,
I
every
would.
single
I
time
would
that you mention,
totally
well, then
put
you
that
might
in
have
my
a problem
opening
winning this
statement.
case. I mean, you're not prosecuting it. So every single time that a prosecutor comes up with a new piece of evidence that requires witnesses to get in, as a defense lawyer, I find that to be wonderful because that gives me a whole nother opportunity to ask questions that may or may not help me argue that there is a reason to have a doubt about the guilt of this man. And every witness is vulnerable. And some of these people are going to rely on are not experienced in handling the cross-examination that I intend to bring them. And if I'm able to say at the end of the case that the prosecutor relies on this person who's unreliable, then why should you convict? We saw it happen. You and I saw it happen together when a man who murdered a woman and the man who was driving his Ferrari around town walked because a glove didn't fit. And I'm just saying that there is no foregone conclusion in any jury trial, and these defense lawyers are going to put this prosecution team to the test, clearly.
To Chris McDonough joining me, veteran homicide detective and star. No. I'm going to somebody that's let me just say
agree with you.
A little less impeachable. Chris McDonough, have you ever heard, which apparently they did not teach this to Mark Tate in moot court in law school, it's SDSU. Sit down and shut up. Okay? That's just one of those things you should learn. It's hard for us lawyers to do that because we think we can just keep talking and then suddenly everybody's going to agree with us. You tell 12 people that this guy has got on surgical gloves in the grocery store. You know why he did that, right? If this can be confirmed, because he's heard about all those cases we've been talking about. Wait till Joe Scott Morgan jumps in on DNA, where cops can get your DNA off a beer can, a coffee cup, a pizza crust. This guy was wearing gloves when he was getting rid of trash in the neighbor's Dixie dumpster, when he was sorting through trash and putting it into plastic Ziploc bags in his kitchen, his parents' kitchen, and it just goes on and on and on. I can't wait for a jury of 12 regular people like us to hear this guy about his surgical gloves all around the time of the murders.
Yeah, absolutely, Nancy. I mean, it just happens to be a coincidence that, he decides to throw his trash out in his neighbor's bin. And then, of course, he takes these 4 a.m. drives, or at least he's awake at 4 a.m. Every moment you think about this guy. If you look at all of his phone pings, does the guy ever sleep? Where we're not seeing these gloves, though? One, all of these glove incidents show up post-incident. But where we're not seeing it? We're not seeing it in the classroom before the incident. We're not seeing it in any of the photos of traffic stops where he stopped before the homicides. And guess what? We're not seeing it in the courtroom today. So I don't know what the deal is, that a jury wouldn't, say, why is this guy wearing gloves at 4 a.m.? And, good luck for the defense on, trying to sell that.
Hey, hold on. Let me throw this to our DNA expert, Joseph Scott Morgan, professor of forensics. All of this is just anecdotal. My back and forth with Mark Tate, that anecdotal, telling a story, okay? Can we talk about hard evidence? If it's true to look at the horse's track record, you know what that would tell me? That he wore surgical gloves at some point that night, okay? When he was in that home murdering those 4 people. And you may ask Joe Scott Morgan, then how would his DNA be on the knife sheath? I'll tell you why. How many times do you think an anal compulsive like Bryan Kohberger had practiced opening that knife and fiddling with that knife and playing with that knife and admiring that knife? That's how the DNA got on there, I think. I think he wore surgical gloves that night, and I would be very surprised if we find his actual fingerprints anywhere in that home.
It'd be tough to find, I think, and we probably would have an indication of that. But yeah, I've held throughout this, when they found that sheath and that contact DNA was there on the snap. I always had this idea of him actuating the button, sitting there with that snap, trying to flick it back and forth to see how smoothly he could do that. And some people have said, and I've had people say this to me about this, well, why wasn't his DNA found on other locations on the sheath. And this is what I submit. I think that he may have wiped that sheath down at some point in time, but the devil is always in the details, Nancy. That little hidden underneath side of that snap, which I think is where they probably recovered it, is not a place that you would commonly consider to wipe it down if you're looking to, get rid of anything that was there that would be an identifier for you. It's an area that he may have missed, and he left it behind in that one tiny area. I'm also interested in what type of gloves he had at his home. Did they find other gloves? So that's going to be a big tell in this case, Nancy.
A friend of an officer working the Bryan Kohberger murder investigation says Kohberger was very careful in the days before his arrest. The source says the cop followed Kohberger in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, and observed him wearing plastic gloves while picking up groceries at a local Giant store. The cop also said that Kohberger's cell phone pings matched the movements of the victims for weeks before the murders.
Part of the hearing on the 14th is to talk about the different parts of that video that we've received and how we need the whole context. This is the video that they say places this car near the residence. We've received little tiny pieces of that. And we think Bryan's right to a fair trial means the public needs to know that they've withheld the audio from a great portion of that, and that it starts a long time before the little clip that we've received.
Man, is she burying the lead. She's complaining about the audio not being attached to the video. Here's the bombshell. There you're hearing the defense attorney for Bryan Kohberger, Ann Taylor, talking about the existence of video that places Kohberger's car, the white Elantra, near the crime scene. Yeah. That's a big deal. We believe that there's going to be 2 different video clips shown to the jury. One near the home and one near the gas station there at the corner. And I'm going to let Chris McDonough describe the gas station video, what he believes it will portray, and what the video at the home we believe is going to portray. Guys, with me, an all-star panel makes sense of what we know right now. Oh, you know what? I was just having my tea, and I didn't want to leave fingerprints on the cup, so I just thought I would use these. Okay. But that said, go ahead, Chris McDonough. Everybody take off your gloves. I promise not to collect your DNA. Well, not during the show anyway. Go ahead.
Yep. So Nancy, love the gloves. Right next to the murder scene, there's a house right on the corner there. And outside in the light socket for the front porch was an active surveillance camera. I believe that the evidence will show that that car comes up that street multiple times, and those are the clips that they're holding back, as well as the additional piece of evidence that they're going to show is away from the scene. They're going to show that that vehicle was either A, coming into the crime scene area, and or B, leaving. And I don't know if they're going to be able to correlate that in relationship to some of the phone pings, because remember, he turned his phone off. So, that in of itself is going to be interesting. Now, one other thing I just want to make a point on here is, the defense is saying they need to see this video. Yet they held the alibi for over a year. So my sense is they're still working on that particular forensic side of the evidence that's going to be presented.
Guys, I want to hear exactly what the defense attorney Ann Taylor said. And in her whining about the video, what are we learning? Listen.
Part of the hearing on the 14th is to talk about the different parts of that video that we've received and how we need the whole context. This is the video that they say places this car near the residence. We've received little tiny pieces of that. And we think Bryan's right to a fair trial means the public needs to know that they've withheld the audio from a great portion of that, and that it starts a long time before the little clip that we've received.
To Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic expert and professor at Jacksonville State University, I was listening to every word she says. Ann Taylor is complaining about little tiny pieces of the video placed in the car near the residence, according to police, and she doesn't like that, and she thinks that's not fair. But what it is different video cameras picking him up along the way. Did you decipher that? Or am I feeding you, spoon feeding you?
No, here's the thing. You know, these ring cams and CCTV, obviously, they're more prevalent today than at any other point in time in history. And so we don't necessarily know about where all of these clips are coming from. We do know the area that he was in, allegedly, this car moving back and forth, is going to be the most densely populated area in this geographic location. You know, you get out in these areas that are far flung. Remember the loop that they talk about, that where they were trying to collect images off of these gas station cams and wherever else the car may have passed. This is going to be the target rich area, though, around that residence at that point in time, because you never know. And you think about, just for instance, you think about one of these cars like a Tesla, for instance, that has an indwelling cam that can pick things up. Did they shake the bushes enough to collect enough of this data out there to piece this thing completely together? Apparently, she thinks they may have, Nancy.
Mr. Kohberger has at least now stated that his alibi is he was out driving around that night. We knew that already. And if that's his alibi, so be it. What the defendant has still failed to do is to comply with Idaho Code 19-519 and Idaho Court Rule 12.1 that specifically requires a defendant to provide identified names of witnesses who will be called to support the alibi along with their addresses.
Latah County prosecutors have again asked the court to prohibit the defense from calling witnesses in support of Bryan Kohberger's alibi. That Kohberger was driving around rural areas the night of the murders, not specific enough to be used in an alibi defense. The state argues Kohberger has been allotted more time than he is legally entitled to provide a specific alibi, and that if witnesses are allowed to support the current alibi, prosecutors will not have the ability to investigate or respond to any new claims.
Okay, the alibi was ripped apart by the prosecutor in the last hearing, and there's a very good reason for that. Just as the state has to hand over all of their witnesses and how to contact their witnesses for the defense to have the opportunity to interview them prior to trial, the defense has to do that too. So why is it that the only corroboration, Mark Tate, that Kohberger is bringing on is a set of cell phone pings?
But there's nothing wrong with that. The prosecution has indicated they're going to rely on cell phone pings. And the law about alibi in Idaho is anytime after arraignment, you're allowed to tell the prosecutors rather, that you're going to rely on alibi and you have to disclose your witnesses. However, here, the witnesses are cell phone pings. Just like the prosecution's relying on cell phone pings, so is the defendant allowed to rely as well. Now, of course, that's going to be put in front of a jury, just like issues about whether he wore gloves and how strange that is. All of that will be admitted by witnesses, all of whom are subject to a sifting cross-examination. And so now the prosecution knows there's going to be an alibi defense, and when there is, it has to be supported by admissible evidence. And so with each witness comes the chance to demonstrate reasonable doubt.
You're just reading the criminal code on evidence to me. I got it.
That's right.
Hey,
so that's
Liz,
what the defense lawyer has to do. That's what they have to do.
Let's give Mark
They have to
Tate
hold the
a little
prosecution's
bit of his own
feet
medicine.
to the fire. Well, what is it? You going to make me wear gloves?
Cell phone pings. I've got a pair here for you, but maybe you could borrow Kohberger's. Oh, wait, no, they're in evidence. Hey, look at this. You know, as we were talking earlier, joining me, Chris McDonough, you were talking about the pings, and you didn't get to say it on air. But Tate is all about, the pings are going to help exonerate him. Wait a minute. Okay, he's at home, 2:42. He's at home, back at home at 5:27. He's at home at 9:32 a.m. But wait a minute. 4:50, phone ping. 4:48, phone turned back on. Wait, 2:47 a.m., right before the murders? In the middle of the night while he's out stargazing, he decides to turn his phone off from 2:47 to 4:48. Wow. Chris McDonough, isn't that exactly when the time the murders occurred?
Yeah, absolutely, Nancy. And what's interesting about that, and you pointed it out, was, the one thing we learned about this alibi as well is all four of the victims are sound asleep. And, the 12 other times that he was seen around that neighborhood, they were also asleep. But in this particular case, you have the phone pings that get up to the point where they turn off. And then all of a sudden, the video picks it back up in the neighborhood, i.e. the car. So, to try to sell that, from the defense, whenever you hear a defense attorney say, the public has a right to know and there's a gag order, that's usually a clue that there's something coming.
Kohberger has spent over 500 days in jail awaiting trial. Every day in the jail cost $194, totaling nearly $100,000 so far. Kohberger's defense team bills over $500 an hour. The hours police spent cost nearly $1 million. The University of Idaho left with a massive bill, spending $1.4 million on increased security and another $200,000 on counseling and a vigil. It's estimated taxpayers spent roughly $3.6 million as a result of the murders.
Dave Mack, what did I just hear?
For Bryan Kohberger's defense team to pretty much spend at will. Never heard of anything like this in my life, Nancy Grace.
Okay, a total of $3.6 million the taxpayers have paid for Kohberger?
When they say we pay, that's taxpayer money, I wish they would actually send me a questionnaire about what I'm willing to pay for, ahead of time, because this is ridiculous.
$3.6 million on Kohberger and all of his defense attorneys and experts. We're now learning about Kohberger bringing on another expert to try and shore up his alibi. Cha-ching! Listen.
The document filed serves as Kohberger's official alibi and claims, quote, Mr. Kohberger was out driving in the early morning hours of November 13, 2022, as he often did, to hike and run and or see the moon and stars. He drove throughout the area south of Pullman, Washington, west of Moscow, Idaho, including Wawiwi Park. To further solidify his alibi, Kohberger said he plans to offer testimony from a CSLI expert to show that he was south of Pullman and west of Moscow at the time of the murders and that he did not travel east on the Moscow-Pullman Highway in the early morning hours of November 13, 2022.
Okay, Chris McDonough, what is a CSLI expert?
That expert, Nancy, will be an individual that will be able to tell investigators and or the jury what the signature is of that phone, i.e. the information coming out of that phone to the nearby cell towers.
To you, Karen Stark, I hope the state doesn't get bogged down in a lot of scientific evidence. That's what happened in the Tot Mom Casey Anthony trial, where she killed her daughter Kelly and was acquitted. But that evidence was true, but it did get bogged down. You know what? Once the jury hears that after the murders, this guy went everywhere wearing plastic gloves, I mean, I don't need an expert to tell me that's evidence of guilt. And I don't mean just that, Karen Stark, not just that, of course. The DNA on the knife, the fact that he ordered the exact same knife and sheath from Amazon, but what it's missing, nobody can find it. The cell phone, the video string cobbled together where we see his movements that night. There's so much evidence, Karen, much less this.
You're talking about a guy who needs complete control and dominance, Nancy. I know this is going to come out. I mean, how telling is it that the phone is on and right before the murders, he turns it off? And that to me is completely compelling. And this guy, he has a history of staring at women to the point where they throw him out of restaurants. But he's been complained about. He's been said that he's odd. He takes control in a classroom. He studies how to do murders. I mean, that's his expertise.
Well,
Years.
Karen Stark, it hasn't come out yet, and I don't think that it will be part of the evidence because it will be very inflammatory. But when I was in Moscow and around Pullman speaking to people there, several female students came up to talk about how angry he would act at them, graded them much more severely than he did men. I mean, it was very compelling evidence that this guy hates women.
You may or may not have heard this recording. It has been circulated around Facebook groups and the internet true crime community in general. One of the channel subscribers, Double R, brought this to us recently during a live stream. Thank you, Double R. This recording is reported to be Bryan Kohberger himself. After the Watch the Obsession team and myself did some quick research, what we learned is this. At least 4 people who know Bryan Kohberger personally say that this sounds just like him, that they believe it is his voice. But the opinion is split because at least 2 people who know Bryan Kohberger personally in living color say that they do not believe it's his voice. You'll notice a couple minutes into this recording, Bryan Kohberger catches himself recording this audio/video apparently, and it seems as though he is reading from a script. Now, the image of the person reading this script about the November 13th Idaho 4 tragedy is obscured, and we're going to need to take a look at whether or not that obscured image is in fact Bryan Kohberger or if it is someone else. Take a listen, watch carefully, and please leave a comment letting us know what you think.
Into the quadruple homicide in Idaho. I don't want to be any more specific than that because I don't want to put anybody in a challenging or contentious situation regarding their continued employment. And I will say what I'm about to tell you is secondhand, but it is from what I believe to be a very reliable source. Again, this can only be considered a rumor as I don't have firsthand knowledge. I never planned on posting any of this information out of respect for the victims' families. However, now that one of the victims' fathers has released some of the gruesome details himself, I'd like to share some of the investigative theory. As you know, the 2 women were found in the same bed, but with similar wounds. That's what's being reported. That's not exactly 100% true, at least in regard to the fact that they hadn't fallen to sleep in the same bed. One of the victim's wounds were deep gouges that were delivered with extremely aggressive force, so much so that the victim's liver and lungs were destroyed. Here's the theory that's happening. They definitely think it was a man because of the force of the wounds. The person must have been very strong. They think the man came into the room after doing what they did on the 2nd floor. They went upstairs. The person cleanly and quietly unalived the first victim. The second victim awoke and tried to run. They believe that the man possibly grabbed her, and she screamed loudly. The man then harmed her, and the reason the wounds were of such force, he was delivering it quickly and forcibly to quiet her, which I apologize for how I know it's disturbing, but anyway, how do we know that she screamed? Because 3 individuals reported hearing a scream between 3:45 and 4 o'clock. That's why the police have such a specific time frame as to when the murders occurred, because I don't know if you noticed, but the authorities weren't called the next day until late in the morning, yet they had a very specific time frame when the murder happened. They think the scream is why. And after reviewing video files from the neighborhood, they reviewed security cameras in the area, and they have an audio file where I haven't heard it, but I was told that you can clearly hear a loud scream from a female. That scream was recorded at exactly 3:38 a.m. Neighbors say they didn't call the police because they said there's often loud noise coming from the house. I was told that there are parties there all the time. Again, I don't know if that's true, but it's what I was told. The weapon used was a long serrated-edged hunting knife with a fixed blade. The weapon had not been in the house. The person brought it with them and took it when they left. The two victims were on the same bed, not side by side. One victim was found on top of the other. The reason is that the one tried to escape and was grabbed, harmed, and then shoved and fell on top of her friend. That is why there's a lot of problem blood mixtures on this at the scene. They're also desperately looking for this white car. The reason being is that it was seen speeding by an A&W gas station. I don't even know what that is, but anyway, that's, again, it could be wrong. I was just told it was seen speeding by an A&W gas station / hangout at 3:45. Now, if the scream was recorded at 3:38 and the car sped by at 3:45, it's a very tight time frame, but it is possible that the person left immediately and rushed and was seen speeding by. Also, the scream may have been what caused the person to quickly leave. That scream could have been what saved the other two roommates' lives. The person knew that they might be detected, so they sped away. Again, this is all just rumor. Take it for what it is. I just pray for these young people. I hope they rest in peace and that their families can find peace after this horrible crime, and I hope that the person who committed it can be brought to justice. Thanks a lot.
So there you have it, folks. We do note that the details of what this person says about this horrific crime are eerily similar to what is believed to have actually most likely happened. We also note, I myself, as a person with a psychology background and a behavioral therapist, note his rate of speaking and his tone. It sounds like he gets excited during certain parts of this narrative as he is telling his version of what he says is a theory of what happened in this crime. Please leave a comment letting us know what you think. I'd really like to know if this recording is authentic or not.